When my daughter whispered, "My mother-in-law said you deserved this," I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not even ask her to explain. I just sat there, tired in a way sleep could not fix, and looked at the kitchen window where the rain was tapping softly, like it was afraid to interrupt the moment. She was standing in front of me, holding her coat in one hand and her phone in the other. Her shoulders were slumped. Her eyes looked older than they should have. She had driven over late, after her kids were finally asleep, just to check on me. That alone told me something was wrong. I nodded slowly, like I had already known. Because somehow, my heart had been expecting it. And then she added, barely louder than a breath. "Mom." Uncle David stepped in. That was the moment my chest tightened. Not because of the words, but because of the silence that followed. Some stories don't begin with shouting or slammed doors. Some stories begin with exhaustion. With a woman who has given too much for too long, and finally runs out of places to put her pain. This is one of those stories. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind with trimmed lawns, mailboxes painted white, and neighbors who wave but don't really ask how you're doing. I've lived here for over 30 years. Long enough to watch trees grow tall. Long enough to see children learn to ride bikes, then drive away in cars packed for college. My house is not big. But it was always full. Full of noise. Full of shoes by the door. Full of dinner smells that lingered into the night. My name is Margaret. Most people call me Maggie. I am a mother of two. A wife. And, for most of my life, the person who held everyone else together. My husband Robert and I moved into this house when our son Daniel was 6 and our daughter Emily was 3. Robert worked long hours as an electrician. I stayed home when the kids were young, then worked part-time at the local library once they were in school. We were not rich. But we were steady. And steady felt like enough. Our life followed simple rhythms. Breakfasts were rushed. Dinners were together. Sundays were slow. Robert fixed things around the house. I kept calendars, remembered birthdays, and made sure everyone had clean clothes and full plates. I was good at it. Or at least, I tried to be. Daniel was my firstborn. Quiet as a child. Thoughtful. The kind of boy who felt things deeply but didn't always say them out loud. Emily was different. Bright. Expressive. She spoke with her hands, with her eyes, with her whole heart. They were close growing up, in the way siblings are when they share secrets and arguments and late-night snacks. I loved watching them together. It made the hard days feel worth it. As they grew older, life changed, like it always does. Emily married young. She met Mark in college. He was polite, respectful, and ambitious. They moved just 2 towns over. Had 2 children. A boy named Lucas and a girl named Sophie. Emily became busy in the way young mothers do. Tired but glowing. Stretched thin but still smiling. Daniel stayed home longer. He worked locally, saved money, and helped his father with projects. When Robert passed away suddenly from a heart attack 8 years ago, Daniel became very quiet again. Grief does that. It settles into the bones. I remember the night Robert died. The house felt too big. Too empty. I sat on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders and listened to the refrigerator hum, wondering how something so ordinary could keep going when my whole world had stopped. Daniel slept on the floor of my bedroom that night. Emily cried into my shoulder. We survived it. But we were changed. Years later, Daniel met Rachel. She was confident. Organized. She had opinions and wasn't afraid to share them. She worked in real estate and spoke quickly, like she was always planning 3 steps ahead. At first, I admired her strength. She seemed to know exactly who she was. They dated for 2 years before getting married. Rachel's parents lived in another state, but her mother, Linda, was very involved from a distance. She called often. Offered advice freely. Had strong views on how things should be done. The wedding was beautiful. Emily cried. I cried. Daniel looked nervous but happy. I hugged Rachel and told her she looked lovely, and I meant it. After the wedding, Daniel and Rachel moved into a small house 5 minutes from mine. I thought it was a blessing. Close enough to help. Close enough to visit. Close enough to still feel like family. But closeness can be tricky. It can warm you. Or it can burn. At first, everything seemed fine. Rachel invited me over for dinner. She asked for recipes. She smiled politely when I talked about Daniel as a child. I tried to give space. Tried not to interfere. I told myself, he has his own family now. Be supportive. Be quiet. But small things began to change. Rachel started correcting me gently. Then less gently. Daniel doesn't like his shirts folded that way. We don't let shoes in the house. I think it's better if you call before stopping by. All reasonable things. I adjusted. I always adjust. I stopped dropping by unannounced. I folded shirts differently when I helped with laundry. I asked before giving advice. But there was a feeling I couldn't shake. Like I was slowly becoming a guest in my son's life. Daniel didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but didn't know how to fix it. He loved Rachel. He wanted peace. And I didn't want to be the reason for tension. So I smiled. I swallowed words. I stayed quiet. Then Rachel became pregnant. Everyone was excited. Especially Linda. She flew in for visits. Called daily. Sent articles, lists, instructions. She had very clear ideas about motherhood. I tried to stay out of it. I remembered how overwhelming new motherhood could be. I offered help, but only when asked. I bought practical gifts. I kept my opinions to myself. The baby, Ethan, was born on a rainy Thursday morning. He was perfect. Tiny fingers. Soft cries. A new beginning. I held him once at the hospital. Just once. Linda was there, hovering, guiding, directing. Rachel looked tired but proud. I kissed Ethan's forehead and whispered a prayer for his life. I didn't know then how much distance would grow between us after that moment. As the months passed, visits became less frequent. Rachel was busy. Linda had strong opinions about routines, feeding, schedules. Daniel worked more hours. When I did visit, I felt like I was in the way. Rachel would take Ethan from my arms if he cried. Linda would make comments over video calls. Babies shouldn't be held too much. Things are different now. I reminded myself not to take it personally. But pain doesn't always listen to reason. Emily noticed before I said anything. "Mom," she said one afternoon while helping me fold laundry, "are you okay?" I shrugged. "I'm fine." She didn't push. She just hugged me from behind and rested her head on my shoulder. Sometimes love doesn't need words. The first time Rachel asked me not to come over for a while, she said it politely. "We're just trying to establish our own routine," she said. I nodded. I understood. Or at least, I told myself I did. Weeks passed. Then months. I saw Ethan mostly through photos. Holidays felt quieter. Daniel called, but conversations were short. I told myself this was life. Children grow up. Parents step back. Still, the house felt emptier than it ever had after Robert died. And then came the day my daughter whispered those words. But before that, there were many quiet moments. Many small cuts that didn't bleed but still hurt. And one man, watching from a distance. Listening. Waiting. My brother David. David is my younger brother by 2 years. He has always been the one who notices what others miss. After Robert died, he checked in often. Not with big speeches. Just simple questions. "How are you really doing, Maggie?" I usually answered, "I'm okay." He never argued. But his eyes always lingered, like he knew, okay, was just a cover. He lived across town. He visited sometimes. Drank coffee at my kitchen table. Fixed things without being asked. He saw the empty chairs at holidays. He noticed when Daniel stopped coming by. He didn't say much. But he was paying attention. That night, when Emily stood in my kitchen, rain tapping at the window, and whispered what Rachel's mother had said about me, I finally understood. Some pain is planned. Some distance is taught. And some silence is not accidental. But what I didn't know yet was how far things had already gone. Or how one quiet man, who loved me without conditions, was about to step into a story I had been trying to survive alone. After Emily left that night, I stayed at the kitchen table long after the rain stopped. The clock ticked softly on the wall. I watched the second hand move, one small step at a time, like it was carrying a heavy load. I told myself not to think too much. Thinking made my chest feel tight. The next morning, I woke early, as I always did. Habit does not disappear just because life changes. I made coffee for one. I stood by the sink and watched the sun touch the tops of the trees across the street. Everything looked peaceful. Almost kind. But inside me, something was restless. I kept hearing Emily's voice. "My mother-in-law said you deserved this." I wondered what this really meant. The silence. The distance. The slow fading out of my place in my son's life. I did not call Daniel. I did not text Rachel. I waited. Waiting had become something I was very good at. The first invitation that never came was Thanksgiving. In the past, Thanksgiving had always been loud in my house. Robert carving the turkey. Emily sneaking pieces of pie before dinner. Daniel helping set the table, pretending he didn't care. That year, Daniel called a week before. "Mom," he said, "we're going to do something small this year. Just us." I smiled even though he couldn't see me. "That's nice," I said. "I hope you enjoy it." After the call ended, I stood in the living room and looked at the dining table. It was still there. Still solid. But it felt like it belonged to another life. Emily invited me to her house instead. I went. I laughed when I was supposed to. I played with the kids. But when I drove home that night, the streets were empty, and the quiet followed me all the way to my door. Christmas came next. Rachel sent a short message. "We're staying in this year. Hope you understand." I replied with a heart emoji and the words, "Of course." Understanding was my strongest skill. I mailed gifts instead. Wrapped carefully. Chose things Ethan might like when he was older. A book with his name written inside. I never knew if he received them. No one said. It wasn't one big moment that broke me. It was the small ones. Seeing photos online of family gatherings I wasn't invited to. Hearing about milestones weeks later. Realizing I was always the last to know. When Daniel did come by, it was quick. He looked tired. Distracted. Like he was somewhere else even when he was sitting across from me. "How's Ethan?" I asked once. Good, he said. Busy. That was all. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to say I missed him. I wanted to ask if I had done something wrong. But fear has a way of sealing your mouth shut. Rachel stopped calling me by my name. She started calling me Daniel's mom. It was a small thing. But it stung. When I tried to hold Ethan during one visit, Rachel watched closely. When he fussed, she took him back quickly. He needs his nap, she said. I nodded and stepped back, my arms suddenly feeling very empty. Linda's voice was often present, even when she wasn't physically there. On speakerphone. On video calls. Always advising. Always correcting. One afternoon, I overheard her say, "Some grandmothers don't know their place." She smiled when she noticed me listening. I smiled back. Emily called me later that day. "Mom," she said gently, "you don't have to keep putting yourself through this." "I'm fine," I said. Again. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't think you are." The tension grew slowly, like a crack in a wall that widens with time. Daniel stopped asking for help. Rachel stopped pretending to include me. Linda became more present than ever, flying in for long stays. And I became quieter. I stopped offering. Stopped suggesting. Stopped hoping. But hope does not disappear easily. It just hides. The breaking point came with a birthday. Ethan's first birthday. I marked it on my calendar weeks in advance. I bought a small gift. A soft blanket with stars on it. I waited for an invitation. None came. The day before, I finally called Daniel. "Oh," he said, sounding surprised. "We're doing something small. Just family." I didn't ask what that meant. "I understand," I said. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried for the first time in months. Not loudly. Just quietly. Like I didn't want to disturb anyone, even though I was alone. That evening, my brother David stopped by. He didn't announce himself. He never did. He knocked once and came in when I called out. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he put the grocery bag down and said, "What happened?" I tried to brush it off. But something in his face told me not to lie. "I didn't get invited," I said simply. He nodded slowly. "To what?" "My grandson's birthday." He didn't speak right away. He sat down across from me. Folded his hands. "This has been going on for a while, hasn't it?" I looked down at the floor. "I don't want to cause trouble," I said. He sighed softly. "Maggie, trouble doesn't only come from speaking. Sometimes it comes from silence." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. The birthday came and went. Photos appeared online. Decorations. Cake. Smiles. Linda was there. Front and center. I wasn't. That night, Emily called me crying. "Mom," she said, "I'm so sorry." "It's okay," I told her. But my voice cracked. "No," she said. "It's not." Weeks later, something shifted. Rachel became colder. Shorter. Daniel became more distant. I could feel something building, even though no one said it out loud. Then came the message. Rachel texted me late one evening. "I think it's best if we take a break from visits for now. There's been tension, and it's affecting our family." I stared at the screen for a long time. I typed. Deleted. Typed again. Finally, I wrote, "I understand. Take care." I set my phone down and sat in the dark. That was when Emily came over. Exhausted. Shoulders heavy. Voice low. That was when she whispered what Linda had said. That I deserved this. Because I was too involved. Because I didn't respect boundaries. Because I was part of the problem. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said, "Thank you for telling me." She looked at me like she wanted to say more. Like she wanted to protect me. And then she said the words that changed everything. Mom. Uncle David didn't stay quiet. That night, after Emily left, I sat alone again. But something was different. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just sad. I was aware. Aware that this had gone further than misunderstandings. Aware that stories were being told about me. Aware that silence had been mistaken for guilt. And somewhere across town, my brother was no longer just watching. He was moving. I did not sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying Emily's words. Not loudly. Not sharply. Just over and over, like a quiet echo that would not leave. Uncle David didn't stay quiet. I wondered what that meant. David was not the kind of man who rushed into conflict. He believed in choosing his words carefully, in speaking only when it mattered. If he had stepped in, it was because something had crossed a line. Still, I was afraid. Not of shouting. Not of anger. But of truth. Truth has a way of changing things forever. The next morning, my phone rang early. It was David. "Did I wake you?" he asked. "No," I said. I was already up. There was a pause. I could hear him breathe on the other end. "Maggie," he said gently, "we need to talk." I sat down at the kitchen table. The same place where I had listened to so many quiet moments. "I know," I said. He came over an hour later. He brought coffee. He always brought coffee when he knew a conversation would be hard. We sat across from each other. The morning light filled the room, soft and pale. "I didn't plan to get involved," he said. But I couldn't listen anymore. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. "Emily called me," he continued. "She was upset. She told me what Linda said. And what Rachel's been telling people." My stomach tightened. "What have they been saying?" I asked quietly. David looked down at his hands. "That you interfere. That you guilt Daniel. That you make everything about yourself." Each word landed slowly. Carefully. Like they were being placed instead of thrown. I nodded once. "I see." "No," he said firmly. "You don't. And that's the problem. You've been carrying this alone, thinking it's your fault." He looked up then. His eyes were steady. "It's not. David told me that Linda had been speaking to other relatives. Framing stories. Rewriting moments. Making it sound like I was controlling, emotional, unwilling to step back. Rachel had repeated those stories. Daniel had stayed quiet. Not because he agreed. But because silence was easier. When David heard it all, something in him broke. "I called Daniel," he said. My heart skipped. "You did?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "And then I went to see him." He described the visit slowly, carefully, like he was choosing the right memory from a shelf. Daniel had looked surprised to see him. Nervous. They sat in Daniel's living room. Ethan was asleep upstairs. Rachel was out. "I asked him one simple question," David said. "Do you believe your mother is trying to hurt your family?" Daniel hadn't answered right away. Finally, he had said, "No." That's when I asked him why he was letting others say she was. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He just spoke. He reminded Daniel of who I had been. The years I showed up. The times I stepped back. The ways I adjusted without complaint. He told Daniel that boundaries were healthy, but cruelty dressed as boundaries was still cruelty. Daniel cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, like someone who had been holding his breath for too long. But the real turning point came later. Linda had called David that same evening. She was upset. Defensive. Certain she was right. She said, "You need to accept consequences," David told me. For what? I asked. For existing too close to your son. We both sat in silence after that. 2 days later, I received a message from Daniel. "Mom, can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time before replying. Yes. He came over that afternoon. Alone. He looked like he hadn't slept. We sat in the living room. The same couch where he had once slept on the floor beside me after his father died. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't speak. I didn't protect you," he continued. "I thought staying quiet would keep the peace." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Peace that costs you your mother is not peace," I said softly. He nodded. He told me about the pressure. Linda's constant advice. Rachel's fears. His own fear of losing his family. "I didn't know how to stand in the middle," he said. "You didn't have to stand in the middle," I replied. "You just had to stand." Tears filled his eyes. Rachel came later that evening. She stood in the doorway. Arms crossed. Defensive. "I hear you've been talking," she said. David was there by then. Quiet. Watching. "Yes," Daniel said. "We have." Rachel looked at me. "I never said you were a bad person," she said. "No," I replied calmly. "You just let others say it for you." The room went quiet. Linda joined on speakerphone. Her voice was sharp at first. Certain. David spoke then. "With respect," he said, "this is not your household." There was a pause. "You don't get to decide who deserves to be loved," he continued. "And you don't get to erase a mother because she doesn't disappear quietly." Linda said nothing after that. Rachel's shoulders dropped. She looked tired. Worn. "I felt judged," she admitted. "I felt like I was failing." I nodded. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "But you did," she said. "Intent and impact are different," I replied. "But silence created more harm than honesty ever would." She looked at me for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real." That night, after everyone left, I sat alone again. But the silence felt different. Not heavy. Honest. I didn't know what the future would look like. I didn't know how much would truly change. But I knew one thing. I was no longer invisible. And sometimes, that is where healing begins. In the days after everything was finally spoken out loud, the house felt different. Not suddenly happy. Not magically healed. Just, lighter. Like a window had been opened after years of stale air. I moved through my mornings more slowly. I still woke early, still made coffee for one, but the quiet no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to rest. Daniel called more often. Not long calls. Just check-ins. "How are you today, Mom?" I answered honestly. That was new for both of us. Rachel did not come around right away. And that was okay. Healing does not like to be rushed. It needs patience, and patience needs trust. We were still learning how to trust each other again. Emily visited often. She brought the kids. Laughter returned to my living room in small pieces. One afternoon, as Sophie played on the floor and Lucas helped me water the plants outside, Emily said, "You look different." I smiled. "How?" "Calmer," she said. "Stronger." I thought about that for a moment. "I think I stopped shrinking," I said. David checked in quietly, the way he always did. He never took credit. Never said, "I told you so." He just made sure I was okay. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set, I asked him, "Why did you step in?" He shrugged. "Because silence stopped protecting you," he said. I nodded. The first visit with Ethan after everything happened was careful. Daniel brought him over on a Sunday afternoon. Rachel came too. She looked nervous. So did I. We sat in the living room. Ethan toddled around, curious and unsteady. At one point, he reached for me. I froze. Rachel watched. I looked at her. She nodded. I picked him up gently. He rested his head on my shoulder like he had known me all along. Something in my chest softened. Rachel wiped her eyes quickly. We talked later. Just the two of us. She admitted she had been afraid of being judged. Of not being enough. Of losing control. "I let my mother guide me instead of trusting myself," she said. "I know that feeling," I replied. We sat quietly after that. No need to fill the space. Boundaries changed. Not walls. But doors. We learned to knock. To listen. To speak before resentment could grow. I did not insert myself anymore. But I did not disappear either. Daniel learned to speak up. Rachel learned to pause. Linda learned to step back. Not perfectly. But better. Months passed. Birthdays came. Holidays returned, slowly. I hosted Thanksgiving again, but smaller. Calmer. When I watched Daniel help Ethan carry a plate to the table, I felt something close to peace. Not the kind that erases pain. The kind that grows around it. One afternoon, Rachel handed me a letter. "I wrote this because sometimes I say things better on paper," she said. I read it later, alone. It was not perfect. But it was honest. That was enough. I still have moments when old fears whisper. When I wonder if I will be pushed aside again. But now I speak. And when I speak, I am heard. If there is a lesson in my story, it is this. Silence does not always mean strength. And love should never require you to erase yourself. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let someone see your pain. And sometimes, someone who loves you will step in when you no longer can. Now, when I sit at my kitchen table in the early mornings, the quiet feels different. It no longer feels like rejection. It feels like rest. The same window is there. The same light filters in. The same clock ticks on the wall. But I am not the same woman who once sat here wondering what she had done wrong. I have learned that love does not disappear when it is challenged. It waits. It watches. And sometimes, it needs help finding its voice again. I still think about the moment Emily stood in front of me, exhausted, whispering words that broke something open inside my chest. At the time, I thought that moment was the lowest point of my life. But now I understand something else. That moment was the beginning of truth. I see my family differently now. Not as perfect. Not as broken. Just human. Daniel is learning how to be a husband and a son at the same time. Rachel is learning how to be a mother without carrying fear like armor. Emily is still my quiet protector, even when she pretends she doesn't need to be. And David. David is still the steady presence who reminds me that love sometimes shows up quietly and refuses to leave. I don't expect things to stay perfect. Life doesn't work that way. But I expect honesty now. And respect. And space for everyone to exist without being erased. Sometimes, Ethan runs toward me without thinking. Sometimes he doesn't. And that's okay. Because love is not measured by how tightly we are held. It is measured by whether we are allowed to stay. I used to believe that being a good mother meant stepping back no matter how much it hurt. That sacrifice was always silent. That pain was something you carried alone so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I don't believe that anymore. I believe love should be gentle, but it should also be fair. I believe boundaries should protect, not punish. And I believe that no one deserves to be pushed aside simply for loving deeply. If you are listening to this and you feel unseen. If you have stayed quiet to keep peace. If you have made yourself smaller so others could feel bigger. Please hear this. Your silence does not define your worth. Your presence matters. And asking to be treated with kindness is not selfish. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop accepting pain as the price of love. And sometimes, someone will step in for you, not to fight your battles, but to remind the world who you are. Tonight, when I turn off the lights and walk through my home, I don't feel empty anymore. I feel grounded. And that is enough.